Hello, and thank you for clicking on the video. It has been some time since I've discussed police background investigations, so I figured that I would dive into another topic that some students asked me to complete a video on. The topic is, should you just apply for one law enforcement agency and wait to see what happens, or should you apply for a group of agencies to see if you have an opportunity to get hired? And I gotta tell you, the strongest advice I will give you in terms of getting a job, if you're the type of student or person that wants to just apply at one department and see what's gonna happen, I think you're really shortchanging yourself, and you should not just focus on one department, but you should focus on a group of agencies that you wouldn't mind getting a job at. For example, years ago when I was trying to get into law enforcement, there weren't that many jobs out there. And so what I did was I applied for over 30 agencies and went through a bunch of interviews and written exams and physicals, physical agility exams, etc. And then went through a bunch of interviews before I got hired. Now the tables have changed. I realize now there are, in California, for example, there's over 30,000 job openings in law enforcement. And so you should think of this as a positive, in that you may not have to apply with at as many agencies as I applied. However, you should think about applying for a group of agencies. I would say 10 or more, in order to improve your chances of getting hired. In California, when you apply to a law enforcement position, you have to list all the agencies that you applied with. So each time you apply to an agency, obviously you have to update the page on your background showing how many agencies have you applied, like which agencies. You applied at Santa Cruz, you applied at Monterey, you applied San Francisco, you applied Fresno, you applied San Diego, LA, etc., right? So that's what you do when you're trying to get a job. Some of you, as you listen to this video, and some of you are like my students, you say, well, I grew up in such and such town and such city, and I really want to get hired there. I think that's a childish thing to say. Yeah, I understand that you know the streets. I understand that you recognize the people. I understand that you're familiar with the city, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not applying to a group of law enforcement agencies, going through their process and getting your foot in the door so that you can get a full-time position in law enforcement. Now, once you get hired in law enforcement, once you're in, you basically then become a lateral, and you can then use that position to lateral over to another agency, meaning that you're now applying as a full-time employee of a law enforcement agency, and you have experience, and now they're going to give you bonus points, and the chances of you getting hired are going to be higher than before when you were just at entry-level status. But again, I can't stress enough, do not make the mistake that a lot of people make, where they select one agency or two agencies and decide that's the only agencies they want to work for. That is the stupidest thing, childish thing I've ever heard of, and I hope you don't fall into that trap. And so I urge you to apply to a bunch of different agencies, and then learn to go through the different processes, through the interview process, through the written exam, through the physical agility. Learn about all the questions they're going to ask you, and then once you finish every single interview, I want you to be driving home and doing what I'm doing, video blogging, about what questions did they ask you, so that someday when you come back to a classroom with me as your professor or somebody else, you can say, hey, in this last interview they asked me about this, and this is how I answered. Do you think that's how I should have answered? And then we'll go from there. But until then, I urge you to apply to as many agencies as possible at the same time, go through as many interviews as possible at the same time, and then you will be gaining experience. The more interviews you do, the better you become.